Hi everybody, it's Jane here with our online classroom, and our class today is all about cohesion in speaking and writing. So I've called it Cohesion Step 3. What I want you to do today is think about how you show links between your ideas within a sentence. So the first point to think about is using conjunctions to join two shorter sentences together to make a longer sentence. So can you say a longer sentence using one of these words? Next, because, so, before, if, then, until, although. And if you don't know the meaning of these words, it's time to think about learning the meaning and looking at how you could practice putting those into sentences. Instead of, that's something we'd probably use when we're speaking quite a lot. I'd rather have chocolate instead of meringue today, please. Meanwhile, I don't usually use this when I'm speaking, but I would use it within writing because it's an excellent conjunction to join some ideas together. So let's have a look at two short sentences and think about what conjunctions would we use to join those two sentences. So you have when, because, until, although. Jane reached for her coat. It was raining. So what would you join those two short sentences together with? Perhaps you could think about a reason for Jane reaching for her coat. So what about although? The two short sentences, Jane reached for her coat, it was raining. So we need to remember to say it as one sentence to see if it makes sense. Jane reached for her coat although it was raining. Does that make sense? No. What about Jane reached for her coat, it was raining, and looking at the conjunction because? If you were writing it or saying it, you'd have to put it together as one sentence to see if it makes sense. Jane reached for her coat because it was raining. Does that make sense to you? Yes. So that would be the correct conjunction to use. Jane reached for her coat. It was sunny. And you see, we've gone back to looking at, could we actually use the conjunction although? So let's put it into a complete sentence. Jane reached for her coat although it was sunny. Does it make sense? Yes, it does. Oh, here's a picture of my cat's socks, and we have some conjunctions there. Then, until, while, if, before. Now, when you're looking at developing your English and when you're learning to add extra words into your sentences, you need to think about what does the word signal to the reader the idea for you joining the two sentences together. So let's have a look at what two sentences we have for socks. My cat snored. Yes, he used to do that a lot, you know, when he was asleep. He was asleep, so we need a conjunction that's going to join those two ideas together and make sense. So which conjunction would you use? My cat snored. He was asleep. What about using then? Remember, you say it as a sentence. My cat snored, then he was asleep. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't, because my cat was asleep already when he was snoring. So I need to find a conjunction that means already or at the same time. My cat snored, he was asleep. Wonder if until will work. So again, you say it as one sentence. My cat snored until he was asleep. Does it make sense? No, it doesn't, because my cat was already asleep and I haven't found the conjunction yet that means at the same time. What about if? My cat snored, he was asleep. The same structure, we say it as a whole sentence. Remember, you write it as one sentence or you say it as one sentence to decide, does it make sense? Is this the correct word that I want to join these two ideas with? Oh, I've actually got my cat's name there as David. David snored if he was asleep. That's definitely not what my cat was doing. I wouldn't use if. So, does it make sense to me? No. I'm still looking for that connective, which means at the same time. My cat snored, he was asleep. Would you use before? Let's follow the same structure and say it as a sentence. My cat snored before he was asleep. Didn't I tell you that the cat was already asleep when he was snoring? So for me, does it make sense? No. My cat snored, he was asleep. Let's have a look at while. Do you remember? We say it as a whole sentence. My cat snored while he was asleep. Does that make sense? Yes, it does, because do you know while means at the same time. So when you're choosing conjunctions, you need to be asking yourself, what is the use of that word? Because all of the conjunctions in English have different use, a different job, and while is telling you that something is happening at the same time. So that's an excellent sentence. Well done if you got that correct. So we're going to have a look at the spider spun a web. He could catch a fly. Remember, we start with two short sentences and we think about, how do I want to join that sentence together? So we've got to decide on the connectives we're going to use. And for these two sentences, we have when, until, so and after. We use the same structure, say or write the sentence. The spider spun a web when he could catch a fly. Does that make sense? No, it's not when, is it? So what word could it be? Which conjunction could I use? What am I really trying to say about the web and the fly? Am I trying to say that the reason the spider spun a web was because he needed to catch a fly, but I haven't been given the word because, so I can't use that one. So let's try so, because so is the same as so that. Remember, we say it as one sentence. The spider spun a web so he could catch a fly. Does that make sense? Yes, so that would be the correct connective conjunction to use. So let's have a look at time links, and this is about varying your linking devices so you can guide your reader without being too obvious. And when you're speaking or writing in English, we find it very important to be telling us about, when did it happen? Let's have a look at some pictures from my holiday to see how that works. So here I am in Spain. I went to Spain last year and we went to a carnival, and if I was setting the scene, that is trying to tell you about what had happened, I'd need to start by telling you when it happened, and I have a number of choices to make depending on whether I want to write down what happened, when it happened, or whether I want to say it. Let's take a look. Yesterday. Well, it didn't happen yesterday, but that is a time connective that I could use. Last year, yes, I could say that. Last year, I went to a Spanish carnival. I could give a specific date. On the 4th of June 2019, I went to the Spanish carnival. Or I might just give you an idea of what was the day like if I'm setting the scene, and I might say one summer afternoon. So remember, the most important thing is set the scene, identify when by using your time connectives and links. So time passing, I was at the carnival, and as time passes you want to use a connective like next. So that tells the person who's listening to you or if you're writing, what happened in which order. So next we saw the clowns, and you know, when we're talking, we often say then, and we use next when we're writing. Do you know, your teacher will probably say to you, stop writing then all the time, because this is true. You can write then to show what happened next, but don't keep writing it because that gets too repetitious and boring. So if I was talking, I would use the word then, and if I was writing, I would use the word next. So with time still passing, we also saw some floats at the carnival during that afternoon, and if I was writing, I would say after that. So after I'd seen the clowns, after that. And time is still passing, but it might have passed a lot longer than that, a couple of weeks later or a week later, when I actually met one of the clowns. I might say a few weeks later if I was writing. So that's a lovely starting part of your sentence if you want to show time is passing. So we're still on time passing, but I've moved from Spain to England. So I've returned to England, and I might be thinking about when did I return to England. So if I was writing, I could put by the end of October. So I'm not just saying it was October, you're identifying by the end of October. And if I was talking about a hobby, this is one of my hobbies. I like to paint and decoupage. So if I was talking about my hobby, I would really be telling somebody about how long it took me and how I felt about the finish. If I was writing, I would really be saying, "Whew, thank goodness I've got to the end of that." So I could use the word finally, eventually, or at last, and I think these are far better time connectives than saying in conclusion. So think about the words that you use to say, wow, that's the end, I've reached the end of that. And the next step of the cohesion is to think about how your conjunctions link clauses. Oh, here I am again on another holiday, and this time I'm at the Jamaica Inn, and can you see I've been put in the stocks? Yes, after I left Jamaica Inn, I practiced looking at what it was like to be in the stocks, because do you know, hundreds of years ago people would be put in the stocks and have tomatoes and things thrown at them if they'd done something really bad. Now I was very lucky, I hadn't done anything bad and I didn't have people throw tomatoes at me, but I did have a practice. So I really like that starting point of your sentence if you're writing after I left, and you could even say this, oh, it happened after I left. Also using the linking conjunction as time went by. And we don't usually use this when we're talking in English, but we do use it to glue our sentences together to suggest what happened next. So instead of saying then, as time went by. So we need to be thinking about using time links to show the passage of time, and use conjunctions to make links between sentences. And oh, look there's a picture of the chapel where I was married. So when I'm looking at those two things that I could use if I was writing about my marriage in 1982, I would use time links because of the length of time that happened. So think about what we might say when we're talking if we're adding ideas. So, and is the same as saying as well, to, also, furthermore, what is more. Another point. So I'm unlikely to say furthermore. I would use that in writing. And I'd probably say what's more, or I might say another point is, or I'm most likely to say also, or as well, or to. And yes, everybody says and, so think about the other words and phrases you can use to add ideas, whether you're talking in English or whether you are writing English. And what do we say, or what might we say if we want to suggest opposition to an idea? But, while, whereas, on the other hand, and on the contrary. Now, I wouldn't say on the contrary. That's something I would write if I had a very formal piece of writing. I would say on the other hand, and I do love while as a word to use when you're writing or when you're talking. And I definitely would use but when I was speaking. But I think I would leave whereas to my written structure. So remember, when you're looking at English words and links, you're thinking about which ones do we use in speaking and which ones do we use most when we're writing. So that's Cohesion step 1, 2 and 3 if you've followed all 3 videos. And remember, nouns, noun phrases and pronouns help bind your writing together, because your reader can go backwards and forwards in that piece of reading and work out what was happening there. And your writing has cohesion. There's that word again that I really talk about being like glue. It sticks together if your writing is clearly organised. It's got words and phrases that act like signposts, and it's held together with conjunctions and connectives. So it's really quite important that you know which word to use when. It's less important to know which one is a connective, which one is a conjunction. It's far more important to know, why am I using it? What does the word suggest? What does it tell the reader if I put this connective or this conjunction between these 2 ideas? So as part of the work on cohesion, I want you to think about words you use in speaking and words you use in writing, and develop some of those ideas by having a practice with short sentences and doing what we've done today in this class, where it's looking at 2 ideas and linking them together. So that is thinking about reviewing and thinking about writing and reading. So the most important message is always review. So you need to make sure that you review your writing all of the time. And when you've written a sentence, or when you've written a paragraph, or when you've written a whole piece of work, go back over it, because that's what review means, and ask yourself, could I have made a tighter structure? Could I have used different ideas and words in my writing? And that's the end for today. So review your writing all the time. Think about words when you're speaking or writing that are connecting or adding opposing ideas. Bye now.